G'day everyone, welcome to Head Talk. I'm your host, Dan the Man, and today we're going to be talking about ADD, more commonly known now as ADHD. ADHD and ADD were originally two separate conditions, very similar, and came under the same bracket of mental health. They're both a mental disability, and they both are to do with your attention. So the full thing for ADHD is Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder. Now, personally, I was actually diagnosed with ADD. So that was Attention Deficit Disorder. This is something that was then, later on, eventually changed to just be one thing, which is now referred to as ADHD. Just like with any kind of mental health issues, there's obviously a spectrum. Some are more high functioning, some are more low functioning. Some are more aggressive, some are more passive. And depending on where you are on this, can determine how society perceives your actions. There is well-known facts about ADHD, and one of them can be to do with the aggressive side of things. And there had been talk about this when I was younger, apparently. This is what I had been informed about, that you've got to be careful with people that have it. They can be aggressive, they'll lash out at you, and it's very dangerous. But at the end of the day, you could say that about almost anything and anyone. At the end of the day, no two people are the same, and this, what is considered a disability, isn't always the case. People aren't always aggressive with that. Personally, I'm not aggressive. Personally, I'm a little bit more impulsive, and I'd say I get a little bit more distracted. With ADD, there's a thing to do with focus. Focus can be having a massive amount of focus or having no focus whatsoever. So having no focus whatsoever is something that commonly people know about. Being distracted, not being able to focus, and having a very short attention span. People aren't actually aware of the opposite end, which is over-focusing, where you over-focus on something and nobody can really get your attention. Somebody could talk to you and say something and you could respond and be like, yep, okay, And then 5 minutes later, somebody comes up to you and says, hey, weren't you going to do the thing that I asked you? And then that person just goes, well, I don't know. Did you talk to me? I don't remember you talking to me. It's like when you're in the zone. People talk about being in that zone, that space where you can focus. It's like that. But you can sometimes get stuck in it. Sometimes you can't even get into the zone, which is the underfocus. It's a very complex thing, and there's also an emotional side of it, where you can be overwhelmed and underwhelmed, and even overwhelmed and underwhelmed at the exact same time. It's to do with the stimulants. Certain things stand out to people, obviously, like certain bright colours and things like that, and maybe loud noises. That gets people's attention. Now, for somebody with ADHD, what can be the case is the smallest amount of noise can get their attention. The very subtle differentiation in colours could grab their attention. It's the little things that cause distraction rather than just the big things. And sometimes big things can be very overwhelming, or sometimes can be very underwhelming. There is a very high chance of depression and anxiety with people who do have ADHD, and these things, I feel like, need to be made aware. It's because things can get confusing, things can get stressful, very stressful, when you feel like you can't focus, when you feel like you can't remember things that you feel like you should be, or things that you need to be. Personally, I've missed appointments before. I've missed birthdays. I've forgotten about birthdays and had to get gifts last minute. Sometimes even forgetting gifts. And it's never out of being insensitive or wanting to harm anybody else. It's just, you forget. Even if you really want to focus on it. You may even set an alarm for it. And yet, even still, you forget. You see the alarm, it reminds you, and you go, oh yeah, of course, I've got to go do that thing, or I've got to go get that. Or this person's birthday's in a couple of days. Yet then, you forget. And then other times, you just remember the most randomest things. You'll pick up things that interest you. And not that people don't interest you. And not the important things that interest you. It's just the things that really excite you and get you pumped up. You remember things like that. Or you remember just little things here and there. Then all the rest just goes right over your head. It's difficult, and it is a challenge. There's plenty of coping mechanisms that people develop over time. Personally, I've developed a few here and there. Yet there's also medication. Personally, I was diagnosed when I was 7, and I started on medication. It was a little bit isolating. Personally, I felt a little alienated. I had to take a 2-tablet system, so I'd have to have one in the morning and then one at lunchtime to keep me going through the day. I remember being called to the office to go and have the tablet pretty much every day because I always forgot that I had to go. You'd think after repetition, but repetition doesn't always set in for me or for others. And it always is different depending on where you are on that spectrum and where you kind of are in a mental state. A lot of people are diagnosed when they're younger with ADHD due to the fact that there's all that pepped up energy, they're running around, they're very fidgety in class, they've got to be doing something. And that's just a case of having energy and being a little kid and wanting to run around and be active. So usually after those generalized diagnoses, it eventually, when they grow up, they usually grow out of it, and they don't necessarily need tablets or medication for it. They don't necessarily need anything to help them out with it because, well, didn't necessarily have it, or it's simply a very mild case. Personally, for me, I've got a very severe case of it where I basically rely on medication at the moment to allow me to focus a little bit more on the day-to-day things. And it also helps with, personally, my own kind of depression and my own kind of anxieties. It allows me to feel a bit more normal. And not to say that I'm not normal without it. It just allows me to cope with the day-to-day life and get through and do things that I need to do or want to do. Although, in saying that, there are good days and there are bad days. Some days are a lot more difficult than others. Some days are really easy. And that goes with a lot of things. You look at people with depression and anxieties. Some days are really good. Some days are terrible. And you can't always figure out which day is going to be great and which day isn't, because you just got to live each day one day at a time. It's important to remember that people with any kind of mental disability or disorder should be checked on. People with depression and anxiety should go see them. Make sure they're okay. Make sure that everything's alright, because sometimes that's all it takes. It's just somebody just to say, hey, is everything okay? It's always good to also remember to think about yourself and think, okay, am I okay? Is everything okay with me? Sometimes it just takes that little bit of initiative to look at yourself and think, okay, am I actually happy with what I'm doing? It's always good to remember that there are people that need help, and you should always go to help them out when possible. Now, personally, I would like to now talk about what I want for this channel. I want this channel to be a place for talking about getting things off your chest, talking about mental health. I'm also looking at maybe some gameplays, things that interest me, doing video games, just a little bit, probably not too much. Definitely maybe do a whole bunch of other things. I do hope to get a camera, and maybe I'll do some good old recordings of activities or things that usually I find difficult to remember, or maybe even things that may be of interest to people. I would also like to talk about potentially having guests on the show, on Head Talk, and talking about different disabilities, different mental disabilities, different physical disabilities, talking about struggles, talking about life growing up, making people aware of mental health and disabilities, and trying to bring a little bit more awareness and bring some positivity, show that life is still great no matter what you have, no matter what hardships you've been through, what struggles you've had to face, what obstacles, to show that you can be successful, you can have a career, you can have happiness, no matter what. Thank you for listening to Head Talk. I was your host, Dan the Man. Hope you enjoyed your time here. Please subscribe, like, share the video, and let me know in the comments if there's anything you'd like me to talk about. And I'll talk to you guys soon.